Welcome. Thank you all for coming to Tackle with TAC 4. I'm Alan Claypool, president of TAC 4 Solutions, and we've been doing this crazy little event for about a year now. This is our fifth one. And so let's talk through just a little bit about why we do it. This is the current political scene that we have with mostly people just screaming at each other. And so what we're trying to do is change the tone of political discourse to move from where we have debates where we're pretty entrenched in our own thinking, instead move to a much more collaborative discussion on how can we hear the needs of the other side, start working towards solutions that work. So that's really the goal that we try to do here with Tackle with TAC 4, so thank you all for coming. Let me tell you a little bit about the logistics of the evening. First, restrooms. There's some right downstairs if anybody needs them. There's also one right through those two doors if you go through there too, so feel free to do that. The way the evening flows is I'll talk about the ground rules in a minute for the evening, and then we will have a panel discussion. So we will have both of our two panelists come up and give a 7-minute monologue. Then we will do, for each panelist, a 15-minute deep dive into, over behind the board here, their needs, fears, and solutions. So what needs are they trying to meet? What fears do they have, meaning what are they trying to protect against from, let's say, the other side, and how did their solutions meet those needs? And so what we're going to do is deep dive into what those core needs, fears, and solutions are with each panelist. Then we're going to pause the event and turn around to you all, not for audience participation, long discussion, but rather, are there any other needs, fears, and solutions that you all, actually, let's not do solutions, just needs and fears, that you all might have that aren't yet on the board, things that we want to make sure that the panelists are aware of while they're going into their discussion. After we get all of that up on the board, then we start what we call sort of the free-for-all between the panelists, where they get to just talk to each other and during the process make their points and also try to hear the side of the other. What points are they trying to make, and how can I tweak my solutions possibly so I'm meeting more needs than I otherwise would have been. And during that 45-minute free-for-all, the coaches and I will, the coaches are on stage, thank you, we'll introduce them in a minute. The coaches and I will, at strategic times, pause the event, pause the discussion going on between the panelists. We'll throw a football flag that you see over here to say, I see a ground rule, what we call a ground rule fumble. And we're going to pause the event and walk the panelists through the mindset change of what they said and how that would be outside of the ground rules, and what's the mindset behind that we consider is aligned with truth, which is the ground rules themselves. How can we get those in line with the ground rules? In general, this is going to be a similar debate that you've seen before, so we're not going to break the flow too much, but we do want to enlighten you all as to how to change your discussion, your political discourse, your Facebook conversations, your dining room conversations, so that you are aligned with truth as well, so that we're having much more productive conversations instead of being polarized. Then at the very end of the event, we will open it up for 25 minutes for you all to actually have audience participation as well. Keep in mind, we will also be watching for ground rule fumbles from you all as well. So we'll walk you through a ground rule change as needed. So let me talk through what the ground rules are very quickly. Show respect with no hint of blame, not just to each other as a panelist, but to everyone on the other side. All of the ideas behind the other side, no blame, no hint of blame. Actually respect them as people, that they have valid points as well. Second, assume positive intent from all on the other side. And that's a tough thing to do when we see behavior from the other side that does not demonstrate positive intent. And yet what we suggest is that all of us are truly here to try to make the world a better place. My definition of better might be different than yours. My solutions of how to get there might be different from yours. And yet we need to approach each other with the reality, with the truth that we are all trying to make the world a better place. And so assume positive intent from all on the other side. Third ground rule is to understand and care about the needs, fears, and proposed solutions of the person on the other side. So this is why we have the board up here. During the panel discussion, we want them to be stating their points. We also want them to be truly hearing what the other side is saying, valid points that the other side has that my solutions may not be meeting. We want them to see each other as truly belayed to each other during rock climbing. When I'm rock climbing, we fall together or we make it to the top together. And so that is true. It's true about us today, but we don't know that that's true about us today. And so as they're having this discussion, we want the panelists to be aware that they need each other and that I need to care about your needs as much as I care about my needs if I'm going to get my needs met. Okay? Ground rule 4, do not complain without offering solutions with realistic action steps that meet both sides' needs. So in our business, we talk about every time I'm frustrated, we teach our clients to take a flag, like pick up a flag in your head and write your frustration on that flag, and you personally hold that flag until you personally have figured out how to resolve your frustration. Not relying on other people, what can you do to resolve this? And that's what we're trying to do here. Yes, we have lots of valid complaints. What can I do about it? Let's provide solutions, not just complaints. Ground rule 5, clarify opinion from fact. This is really tough in the political world because we believe that the facts that we've read are true when really the facts, the statistics, the surveys, the studies that we've read have truth in them, but they're loaded up with our worldview. And that's okay. We just want our panelists to state that, to say, here's a statistic that I have from this source, and here's my worldview that joins with that. So say, we want the panelists often to say, I believe, I think, instead of this is reality. Because when we state those things as fact, when it's really mixed with our worldview, the other side is not going to hear what we're saying because they know that only part of that might be true. They know that part of it isn't true. And when we come with such force saying this is what's true, then the other side just rejects it all because of the force that we have. And so what we're really encouraging our panelists to do is align yourself with truth and state that what I'm saying is statistics, and statistics are loaded up with opinion. And so just state that it's your opinion a lot. Ground rule number 6, seek the truth and workable solutions over political positioning. So we really want to get to the truth of the matter. We also want our panelists to realize that what they currently see as true is not the whole picture. And so where people, all of us, not just tonight, not just our panelists, where all of us in all aspects of life, we see ourselves high up on a pedestal, we're asking you just to question your own virtue and realize that you don't have the full picture. So you can stay on a pedestal, just make it a lower pedestal, okay? So question your own virtue and seek truth. We're really going after what's going to work, not how is my side going to win. And finally, ground rules number 7, where there are core philosophical differences, clarify without accusation. This is the awareness that we do have different worldviews. What the coaches and I are going to try to do is help the panelists get down to their true core. What are those true core philosophical differences? And then, once we know that core, we probably will take varying paths, different solutions. But it's so seldom that we actually get down to the core of what we're saying because we stay up in the vitriol of the polarization. So we want to, tonight, get down to what core philosophies would be. And then it's okay to take different paths. So these are the ground rules. We will leave these ground rules up throughout the evening so that they're right there for both panelists and for you all to see. So let me first introduce our coaches before we get going. Deanna Philpott is president of People Strategy Consulting. PSC, People Strategy Consulting, is a catalyst for igniting the passion and performance of leaders and for people for organizational excellence and success. So she works with leaders and she's a coach and she's been a terrific partner of mine in business. So she's done a great job helping us with Tackle in the past as well. Our second coach is Joe Luttrell, president of EQ Seminars. He's an inspirational speaker who helps transform dysfunction into emotional intelligence, mutual respect, and financial security. He's also finishing up writing a book called Emotional Accountability, How Washington, Lincoln, and Churchill Transformed Anxiety into Emotional Intellect. It's going to be fantastic. I've already heard several seminars on it. It's fantastic. And finally, we have Lynn Schussler-Williams behind. She's going to be our scribe for the evening and part-time coach, and she's the founder of Go Beyond Consulting, which specializes in accelerating sales results, thriving through change, creating a life you'll love living, and networking for success. So thanks to our coaches. You've helped me before. I know it's crazy, so hopefully it'll go okay. Okay, so what we're going to be talking about tonight is, should the state be allowed to regulate coal that does not leave Kentucky? So let me set this up just a little bit. Much thanks to Joe, by the way, for providing some of this commentary. We have mountaintop removal, toxic water runoff, community health problems, ecosystem destruction, and miner safety. We also have jobs, revenue for the state, economic engine of the state, reasonable utility bills, reclamation successes. If you live in Kentucky, you are bound to be familiar with this debate. The pros and cons of coal production have been part of the state's history and heritage for hundreds of years. Many would posit that to realize the benefits of Kentucky's resources without damaging the health of communities and surrounding ecosystems requires a partnership between government, community, and business. The discussion today will focus on what level of government, federal versus state, would provide the most effective partnership to protect both the economic and environmental health of our great Commonwealth. So this is what the panelists will be talking about tonight. I hope, actually, we'll find out what the panelists will be talking about tonight. And so let me introduce the two panelists. Thank you so much to the panelists for coming. Tom FitzGerald, and sorry, I got it wrong there as well. He's the director of Kentucky Resources Council. He's considered Kentucky's unofficial chief environmentalist. He lobbies the state legislature for cleaner air and water, and he won the $250,000 Heinz Award for the environment in 2008. So thank you, Tom, for being here. We also have Jim Waters, who's the president of the Bluegrass Institute for Public Policy Solutions, which is Kentucky's first and only free market think tank. He's a reporter, editor, broadcaster, talk radio guest, and speaker, and he writes the Bluegrass Beacon, which is a weekly newspaper column. So thanks to our panelists for being here. Give them a welcome while they come up. These are the ground rules. Come on up. And you all are free to stand the whole evening or sit the whole evening, whatever works for you. And I believe we decided that, Jim, you were going to go first. Thank you so much, Donna. Okay, so Jim's going to go first. We also have Donna Grant with TAC4 Solutions, who's going to be our timekeeper for the evening. So we have a very specific set time for each segment of the event. So you will have 7 minutes, then you will have 7 minutes. And Donna, so as you hear her say 1 minute to go probably for each one. So just kind of know you'll wrap it up. We'll let you finish your thoughts.
Keep talking so I can get into it.
Oh, okay. So let's see. I don't think I have anything else to say. So
thanks.
Welcome, Jim.
Okay,
You're up.
thank you. Well, first of all, I'd like to thank TAC4 and Alan and all these new friends I've made recently, so thank you for this event. I think this is a great challenge. I've looked forward to this, and we'll see how it goes. I'd also like to thank Tom FitzGerald and our other panelists for his participation, and I hope whatever the dialogue yields tonight, I hope it won't end here. I hope it will continue, and most of all, thanks to the audience tonight for coming, and this is a great venue, so thank you for the invitation. We at the Bluegrass Institute do believe that pollution externalities are a real concern, particularly in the beautiful and wonderful Commonwealth in which we are privileged to live in. We believe that too much is at stake to ignore the issues and concerns about pollution of any kind, including that generated by coal. We believe that our health is at stake. We believe our way of life is at stake. And just as it's wrong in a free society for an individual to dump his garbage in a neighbor's lawn on trash day, so we also believe it's wrong for coal-fired power plants to dump the byproducts of their operations on neighboring communities. It's wrong to contaminate waterways and allow irresponsible coal manufacturing activity that causes the loss of biodiversity and wildlife. Finally, we believe the best way to minimize pollution and protect our environment in Kentucky is to, as much as possible, restore the right to oversee our energy sector and environment into the hands of those most affected by it, Kentuckians themselves. We believe that returning regulatory oversight of Kentucky coal to Kentucky's Department of Environmental Protection would have a significant positive impact on Kentucky, considering that, according to the U.S. Department of Energy Information Administration, their annual coal distribution publication, and confirmed by the state's Energy and Environment Cabinet, about 25% of the coal mined in Kentucky during 2011, that's the latest year for which we have statistics available, never crossed Kentucky's borders, but was consumed primarily by electric utilities right here in the Commonwealth, 25%. From those same sources, the Commonwealth of Kentucky is, quote, the largest single market for Kentucky coal. And so we answer the question, should states be allowed, or should the state be allowed to regulate, without federal interference, coal that is mined, produced, and used within their borders, with a resounding yes. And we do so for three reasons. First, We don't believe that the Federal Environmental Protection Agency always effectively weighs the cost and benefits of its regulation of our coal. We have some examples of this. One is that there are the projected cost versus the projected impacts of the EPA's newest rules. The most costly of these standards is the Utility Maximum Control Technology, or MACT, M-A-C-T for short, which establishes the mercury and air toxic standards. And it will require existing coal-fired power plants to meet the average emission standards of the cleanest 12% of power plants. This rule will require existing coal-fired power plants to retrofit themselves with equipment to achieve a 91% reduction in pollutants like sulfur dioxides, various nitrous oxides, and fine particulate matter that cause airborne mercury pollution. The EPA itself projects the annualized cost of compliance with this proposed rule to be at $10.9 billion in 2015 and remaining at $10 to $11 billion annually through the year 2030. In a December 2011 report on the economic benefits of such regulations, the EPA cited reduced levels of greenhouse gases and methylmercury. In that report, the EPA assigns a monetary value of between $500,000 and $6.2 million per year for these specific benefits. That's the monetary benefit. And yet, by the EPA's own calculations, the cost of these proposed MATS regulations amounts to $9.6 billion annually. So by the EPA's own admission, the cost of the proposed mercury and air toxic standards regulations amounts to $9.6 billion annually, while the only direct economic benefits that the EPA itself attributes to these costly regulations is $6.2 million per year. Therefore, the net value of these regulations is a loss of $9.594 billion annually. The second example I have here that demonstrates what we believe is a failure to adequately weigh the cost versus the benefits of the regulatory process concerning coal is the delay in rendering decisions on mining permit applications. There are 36 applications right now that would either open new mines or expand existing mines in Kentucky. Some of these applications, which are required under the Federal Clean Water Act, have languished for years, since 2008. They appear to be stuck in the EPA's regulatory process. So we think it's a fair question to ask that if the federal agency is doing an adequate job of overseeing the regulatory process of coal, why has it not rendered decisions on all of these applications by now? We believe that such delays create the one factor that the market most dislikes, and that is uncertainty. In fact, a no on these applications would be more business-friendly than the indecision that has occurred. We wonder why it's now requiring legislation from the legislative branch just to get the EPA, which is an executive branch agency, to make decisions on these permit applications. Is it because they don't know what's happening with these applications? Is it the EPA's way of trying to reduce the availability of coal through regulatory fiat? Is it because these new regulatory mandates are more about a political or ideological bias against coal than it really is about clean water or clean air? I'm not answering these questions. I'm just pointing out we don't know. And we believe investors, owners, miners, and the entire communities affected by these decisions have the right to at least know the answer. Why did the Big Sandy power plant in Louisiana, in eastern Kentucky, announce its closure and the elimination of 100 jobs in that small community soon after these new regulations went into effect? Could the fact that the upgrades to meet EPA standards would have cost the plant $1 billion, that's according to plant officials, costs which they would have had to pass on to their ratepayers? And my time is going to run out, so I'm going to outline my other two reasons and just state them, and I can talk about them later. But the second reason why we believe that it would be better for the state to have more control over the coal industry here and the regulation of coal that remains in Kentucky is that we believe that the state has already proven that it can do a good job of regulating coal in responsible ways that adequately protect the environment. On March 8th, 2012, the Lane Report reported that the Kentucky State Government, the Kentucky Housing Corporation, and the Kentucky Pollution Prevention Center were recognized as 2012 Energy Star Partner of the Year by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. The article also talked about how Governor Steve Beshear has outlined a 7-point energy plan to be implemented by the year 2025, which includes, among other things, investigating nuclear energy, developing carbon capture, sequestration technology, lots of things other than coal. And then I guess the final point is that the way I would answer this is that I reread the federal Constitution. And what I discovered was that the 9th and 10th Amendments of the Constitution guarantee two things. One is that it guarantees to the states and to the people all powers not granted to the federal government elsewhere, and it guarantees to the people rights not granted in the Constitution. While the federal Constitution does, in fact, grant some authority to the federal government in the matter of interstate commerce, although there's a lot of discussion and debate about that, it says nothing that I find about granting regulatory authority over resources that never cross state borders. In fact, when you read the founders, they would agree with our point.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. Okay. Tom FitzGerald.
I want to thank. Is this on?
I think you're on.
Hello? Hello? Can you hear me? Can you hear me without this? Yeah. Okay, thanks. I did an experiment one time where they tied my hands to my side and nothing came out of my mouth. So if you will indulge me, let me thank Alan, thank TAC4, thank the coaches for being here, and thank all of you for being here. And Jim, I appreciate this opportunity. This is a dialogue that is important on a lot of different levels to all of us as citizens of the Commonwealth of Kentucky. These are some very interesting and very challenging times in terms of energy, in terms of employment, in terms of charting a path forward for the Commonwealth in very unsettled times. With that comes fears, comes the possibility of rationally charting a course that will provide optimum benefits for all the citizens of the Commonwealth. I always like to start any conversation, and I hope this is going to be a conversation tonight, with full disclosure so you can completely disregard anything I say after that. My frame of reference, my truths, if you will, have been forged by my experiences over the past 41 years as an advocate on environmental issues. Most recently as an attorney for the Appalachian Research and Defense Fund, which does legal aid, was set up under President Nixon, and does free legal assistance for low-income folks. The Apple Red covers Southeast Kentucky. I was the environmental specialist helping to back up all the different offices there. In 1984, I left the federal government and I became the director of the Kentucky Resources Council. We provide free legal and technical assistance to folks who can't find representation and can't afford it. We don't charge for what we do. We don't take fee-generating cases. We handle those cases where someone cannot find or afford representation. So my perspective differs a little bit from the classic environmental perspective because I work at the intersection of poverty and environmental degradation. I have, in the years that I've worked, buried one client who was crushed to death when a coal waste dam failed catastrophically and crushed to death at 4 o'clock in the morning one winter's day. I've seen the lives of hundreds and hundreds of individuals unnecessarily damaged because of irresponsible or thoughtless decision-making by folks involved in the resource extraction business. And so my perspective is a little jaundiced, if you will, a little shaded. I say reasonable, but it is forged by those experiences. I don't see people at their best day. I see people when they're in crisis, either their home, their health, their family, the things they hold dear have been threatened. The question of whether the state could assert jurisdiction over coal that is mined and consumed here in the state is an interesting foil for the issues that are really at play. The short answer from the legal standpoint, and I've taught energy and environmental law as a lowly adjunct at the University of Louisville Brandeis School. I'm certainly not here representing the school, but I've been there since 1986, and so I have a little bit of familiarity with some of the history of this and the history of state lead efforts in terms of environmental protection in the Commonwealth. But From a constitutional standpoint, the question is fairly straightforward. The jurisprudence of the United States Supreme Court in interpreting Article 1, Section 8, Clause 3, which is the Interstate Commerce Clause, is fairly clear. The Congress has plenary power that is limited only by the Constitution itself as interpreted by the Supreme Court, over things in commerce, instrumentalities of commerce, which include rivers, and also things that have substantial effect on commerce. So, for example, as early as 1942, the case of Wickard versus Philpott, which I think Mandy Connell actually was trying to get to, and she did a great job in talking about these issues with Jim yesterday on the air, dealt with the efforts by the Congress to limit the production of wheat in order to prevent ruinous oversupply or shortages. This was coming out of the Depression in the early days of our involvement in World War II. And there was a farmer who had produced more than his allowed quota of wheat. And that was held to be sufficiently tied to commerce, interstate commerce, that the court found that Congress had not overreached by limiting that production, because it would, in the aggregate, have the effect of undercutting Congress's intended goal of stabilizing the price of wheat. Similarly, if you could design a situation in which the mining of coal in Kentucky had no impact in the individual or the aggregate on interstate commerce, on things in commerce as well as the instrumentalities of commerce, including rivers, you might be able to build a defensible case. But the sediment that comes off even properly regulated surface mining operations does not end at the border. It travels across the state line into other states. The air pollution does not stop at the border. So the question of whether the intrastate coal act would survive judicial challenge is really kind of open and closed. The larger issue, though, is whether Kentucky, without a federal mandate, would adequately control the adverse impacts of surface coal mining operations. That was a decision Congress in 1977, looking at the history of the state's inability or unwillingness to do so, determined needed a federal involvement to set a minimum playing field so that there wouldn't be trafficking among the states in environmental degradation in order to protect or attract industry. So it's a question that's worth exploration, but it's one that Congress did not write on a blank slate. They wrote on the slate of the state's inability to have done so for the period of the 1960s and up through the early 70s, and they intervened for that reason. Thank you.
Okay, should we have an early round of applause for both our panelists for the good monologues? Thank you. Okay, Jim, would you like to stand? And we shall, in fact, I will as well. And what we're going to do is a deep dive into truly what your needs, fears, and solutions are that you are trying to protect. So I would like for you to just outline as you can, and the coaches, please assist where you can. What needs are you trying to meet? With your positions in coal, what are the core needs that you are trying to make sure are met?
I guess I would say this, a balanced approach toward the environment and the economy. Our needs are clean environment, clean water, crisp, breathable air. But we want a balanced approach that weighs the true benefits and costs of regulation at any level, for that matter, but particularly from the federal level.
So I'm almost hearing that as a fear that a lack of balance would...
An imbalance, right. It is a fear. I sort of put these together, I guess. A fear is an imbalanced approach. Our fear is an imbalanced approach that uses environmental regulation as a political tool to crystallize the depressed state of the coal market and to keep coal down.
So I'm hearing several things. First of all, that an imbalanced approach, that regulation could be used as a political tool.
Right.
I also heard you say something about the cost weight.
Well, let me list these.
Yeah, go for
it. Okay, because it might make more sense that way.
Yeah, go for it.
We want better economic development conditions in Appalachia. We want the battle over what type of energy we're going to use fought in the marketplace, not forced by regulatory mandates.
Okay, we definitely need to get that on the board. So
I'll slow down.
Lynn has better economic development conditions in Appalachian, and then what's the second part
And
again?
we want the, I guess maybe battle's not the right word, but we want the
question.
We want the question of what type of energy we're going to use answered by the marketplace, not by regulatory mandates, especially ones that have not proven as far as have not been proven as far as cost and benefit goes.
And I hear that as a definite need, but I'm hearing also there's some core below that, and I'm hoping that one of you have questions that can help dive into the core below that.
Yeah, so how does this hit the average Kentuckian if what you're proposing doesn't happen? How does it affect people that are working in factories, people, beyond Appalachia and places like that? Because, all right, I'll stop there because I'm trying to be careful. I watched the Coal documentary and I've got a lot of questions.
That's a good question. In fact, that was one of our fears, is that further economic burdens would be placed on citizens, particularly Kentucky households, and even more particularly low-income citizens who struggled to put food on the table. And now we're seeing, according in fact to the U.S. Department of Energy, that costs here are going to be increasing by 20% over the next decade. And that's going to happen. That's about a $285 on average increase per household.
Due to the regulation?
Well, a majority of it is regulation. Not all of it, but a lot of it is. So what we're concerned about, what our fear is that we're going to create greater hardship, and in particular for people in Appalachia who are directly affected by regulation, but also by higher electricity rates, higher household energy bills, and all of that. So I think that was on my list of fears that we had, that households would be
not
affected.
mistaken, would be across the state, higher energy rates across the state, not just to Appalachia.
That's right. In a new report we just came out with this week, it has the numbers in there, and I can find them, but it's about a $285 average. Right now, the average electric bill is about $1,400 a year, I think is what it is, and this would go up to about $1,700 or close to $1,800 a year. So there would be an increase in electricity costs. We're concerned about, one of our fears is the loss of businesses that rely on energy, large amounts of energy. Kentucky has more than 30% of the nation's aluminum production. And the reason aluminum companies are attracted to Kentucky is because producing aluminum requires a great amount of energy. And so we have a plentiful and cheap source of energy, or we have had. We're concerned that with the regulatory mandates from Washington, that's going to cause existing businesses to close and move elsewhere, not just in America, but in other countries, overseas, other places. And so there's other businesses as well. Stainless steel, we've got a significant stainless steel industry here. We've got aluminum. We've got, even the automotive industry is somewhat impacted by this. So that was one of the fears that I listed. We're concerned about loss of business. Then we're concerned about losing the competitive advantage we have because of our low rates on energy. So it's kind of two sides of the same coin. It's losing existing businesses that depend on that energy, but it's also losing the opportunity to attract businesses here who may not be attracted by our tax structure, by our education system, but they are, and they do come because of our low energy rates. And we want our coal miners to quit losing their jobs. for every mining job in Kentucky, there are at least three jobs. I've seen other, I'm going to be very conservative. I believe there are three jobs for every coal mining job, and we weren't supposed to tell stories tonight, but I heard some there. So we know that people are affected by these, and we know that the grocery store owners and the schools in eastern Kentucky, the teachers, the other businesses that rely on the income of coal miners are also affected. So for every coal mining job, we've lost 4,000 coal mining jobs in Appalachia in the past, I believe, 5 years. And for every one of those jobs, there are three jobs dependent on that. So we'll do the math. I think it's right. 4,000 times 3, and that's how many additional jobs are lost. So that becomes a much larger number as far as employment, impact on employment goes.
And I do want to point out just a minute ago that Jim said, and I believe, and then started listing a ton of statistics. He did that because he is clarifying opinion from fact. So thank you very much. You're doing great. Thank you very much.
We lost in the 2012 downturn, which we had in the coal. We had a downturn in the coal mining industry in 2012. But in 2012, mining employment was down 22%. Total jobs lost 4,028. I was being generous, I guess, in saying it had been over the past few years. Most of those have come in the last very few years. Total production of coal is down about 16%. And the eastern Kentucky coal fields in particular suffered significant losses. So what needs and fears here is what we're talking about. So, the fear here is that that this industry will not rebound, and that forces that are laid against it will keep it down. And we think we need to do some things differently. If we don't think we need to keep doing things the same way over and over and expect some different results. We need some new ideas.
Which leads us, I think, to solutions. So do you want to outline some of the specifics?
Yeah, I've already stated these really tonight, I guess. Based on what we have researched and what comments we've heard even from energy officials and elected officials, but we think there is there would be a real positive benefit to limiting the scope of federal regulatory power over our coal industry. As I said earlier, 25% of our coal that is produced in Kentucky doesn't leave here. It's used here, it remains here, and we think that by allowing that regulatory oversight to occur at the state level, and we are not promoting lowering the standards of environmental achievement and clean air and clean water. We're not proposing that. But what we're proposing is the way that those mandates are enforced, that they should be done at the state level. Because at the federal level, we think that the EPA has become way too political, and that's true whether it's a Republican administration, Democrat, whoever's in office. We have seen swings back and forth in how the EPA, in how they enforce regulations. So that's going to change with the political times. But if we put that at the state level and we renew these principles of federalism that have made our country, we believe, prosperous and strong, then we need to have more. I think we need to have more power in the hands of the states, and we need to renew that balance of power. Right now, listening to what my friend Tom FitzGerald said, I fail to see where we even need states, I mean, why do we even have states? Why do we even have a Department of Environmental Protection if it's not for these areas? So that would be my question, not in a negative way, just we need to have a discussion about what role the state should have. And our fear is that all environment regulation will ultimately be done at the federal level. All meaningful regulation will be done there. So
that would be your fear.
Yeah, but we're talking solutions.
That's okay. That's okay. I
wasn't sure how this was going to work quite. So
you're doing great.
So solutions, how we get there: limit the federal government's power, and renew the balance of power between the states and federal government.
I just had a point of clarification. So you're saying the federal government would still make the regulations, but the state government would be allowed to enforce them?
Well, the state government, at this point in time, the Interstate Coal and Use Act, which we support, states in there that this is not about lowering or lessening regulations. This is strictly about where they're enforced, at what level they are enforced at. And so we think it's more effective to do it at the state level.
So one of Tom's points was that in 1977 that the federal government stepped in because the states were doing a really poor job. So what has changed?
Well, Kentucky has lowered, has made great improvements and great strides in lowering pollution, air control, or air pollution and mercury and the areas that we're most concerned about. And so now that may be an issue in some states. We do understand that there may be, the cross-state air pollution issues. That may certainly be an issue in some states. But the evidence for Kentucky shows, and we can get into this later maybe since I can do it, we can do it now or then. But we believe that there's good support for the fact that Kentucky has shown that it will do the right thing. So yes, if the state was being irresponsible and was not enforcing environmental regulation and we had, dirty water, dirty air that was unreasonable, unrealistic, then, I think that's a legitimate point. But the state has shown that it can reduce pollution. And in fact, as a matter of fact, in 1982, really, the federal government did, and this is from House Speaker Greg Stumbo, who pointed this out last summer. I was at one of the coal mining rallies in eastern Kentucky, but he pointed out that in 1982, the federal government essentially did begin to allow the states to regulate at the state level. It's only been since this administration has come into office in 2008, 2009, that has gone back now. And so our concern is that the EPA has, by regulation, taken back what really Congress intended. We're not convinced that Congress wanted all of the regulatory work to be done by the EPA on Kentucky's coal. We can make some general statements about what they wanted, but we don't believe when it comes to our coal mined and used here that would apply. So.
I want to clarify mine. Yes, I want to clarify one thing though. The solution that you have here limits scope of federal regulatory power over Kentucky coal without lowering standards. In a mature organization, mature industry like the coal industry, when it gets to the point of decline, there needs to be some type of change. Is this the only change that you see that would make a difference in this industry?
As far as the decline of the industry goes, no, I think there are other factors that contribute to, I think there are market forces that have contributed to coal, to some of the problems they've had. And on that, we say that's just the way the market works. But coal has had to fight a two-pronged assault from both the marketplace and Washington. And we don't think we think that by eliminating one of those problems that the coal industry then will have to show whether it can, in fact, revive itself, and we believe it will because of exports and other issues. So,
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
That ends this segment. So we have a great list of needs, fears, and concerns from Jim. So now let's do the same for Tom.
All right.
Let's start just by what are the needs that you are trying to meet?
Well, in terms of coal,
Yes.
regulated coal, I think that the first need is to assure that those individuals who live downhill and downwind and downstream of mining operations and power plants are fully protected in their health from the adverse effects of using the public's waters and the public's air for waste disposal. And I don't think that Jim and I disagree at that level. I think the question becomes where you draw the line. We are a commonwealth that has adopted as a core value in most of our environmental programs the myth that environmental protection and economic prosperity are mutually exclusive. So where the federal government intervened in the Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, and Surface Mining Act, and set a federal floor and said, states, you can regulate under this federalist model. You can apply for and receive delegated authority for these programs, but you can't be any less protective than this standard. We adopted state laws that say we shall be no more stringent than those minimum standards. So that is our current policy on coal. We do the absolute minimum that is required of us by federal law. So when you look to what achievements have been made, the question is, were these achievements that the state took the lead on or that they were required to do under federal mandate? The second need, I think, I absolutely agree, and there's more that Jim and I agree on than we disagree. Where we draw the line and what the role of government, state, local, federal government is one that philosophically there is some departure on. But the idea of economic development and the environmental and physical and cultural health of the southern Appalachian region of Kentucky is a significant concern that I believe we share. If you look at the drivers that are affecting coal production in Kentucky, you find a different set of drivers in western Kentucky, which is predominantly underground production, than you find in eastern Kentucky. Appalachian coal, even in the absence of any federal mandate, has been in decline in terms of the production. There actually had been, up to 2011, a 6% increase in mine-related employment in the central Appalachian region. That increase in employment was not happening in eastern Kentucky. It was happening in Virginia. It's happening to a certain extent in West Virginia. Now there have been additional declines. What are the drivers? And I think the first thing is we need to understand what are the drivers and what we need to put in place to help eastern Kentucky transition in the event that these drivers are going to inexorably result in lower employment and lower economic input from severance tax, for example, and from the indirect employment associated with mining. One of the big drivers has been the depletion of the resource. It is more expensive to produce the coal because the easier resources are being depleted, particularly for steam coal. The second is a very soft market. You look at all of the companies in eastern Kentucky who laid off workers and idled production. Alpha, Arch, what did they say in their 10K forms that they filed with the Securities and Exchange Commission under penalty of perjury if you are not being honest with your form? They said it was market conditions predominantly. It's not regulatory drivers, but it is predominantly the market conditions, the recession that we went through, the weakness in the steam coal market. Now, what is driving changes in the steam coal market? Because overwhelmingly, our coal in Kentucky goes to producing steam to turn turbines to make electricity. We have some metallurgical coal, but not to the extent that some other states are producing metallurgical coal. There is a shift going on within the utility industry away from coal-fired capacity. And as a state that has tied our economic fortunes to coal, one of my fears, is very similar to the fear that Jim has. And that is that we are unprepared to deal with the fact that we have built a significant amount of our manufacturing economy on being an inexpensive source of energy. A third of the stainless steel, a third of the aluminum, a fifth of the cars and trucks in the nation are produced here, and they're produced here not because the companies like the climate, but because we have low energy costs. And those costs are going to increase for reasons, some reasons are related to the internalization of pollution that formerly was being borne by people downwind and are now being required to be put into the product so that we're no longer distorting the market by ignoring those costs. We're requiring the cost to be accounted for. And that is making coal more expensive relative to other types of either renewables or other types of fossil fuels, notably shale gas. The big driver that is changing the marketplace is the development of horizontal drilling and an enhanced fracturing capability to get at tight shale gas formations that historically were not gone and were not developed because the technology was not there. Now you see a significant amount of fracking, as it's called, which is fracturing induced by hydraulics or induced by the introduction of nitrogen. You have the shale gas market, which is now 25% or more of the national market in natural gas, which has driven the price down and is pricing coal out of the marketplace for utilities who are obligated by their states to pick the lowest cost option for generating electricity for their customers. So the concern is that we don't have a plan to deal with what had been our great asset in terms of our economic development strategy relative to other states, and how we are going to maintain and to become more robust in terms of our economic picture, because we have slipped over the last decade to now being the fourth poorest state in the nation per capita. And we're trending in the wrong direction. Facing those challenges, facing the need to be a healthier population, a better educated population, and facing a threat of increased energy costs for very energy sensitive industries, we have to chart a path that relies on having a more robust profile of our electricity generation, that has a plan for a future for these areas that are not going to see the same degree of coal production and income in order to transition to a more diverse economic development picture in the future. We are spending, the severance tax was intended to be there to provide for a time after the severed resource. And unfortunately, a lot of that money has not been spent wisely. And so we find ourselves at a point where there is a decline in production. That decline will continue. It may be abated to a certain extent by an increase in the Asian market. You saw just, I think yesterday, was it Bill Smith announced that 7 new underground mines are going to be opened in eastern Kentucky, in Pike County and a couple of surrounding counties, to serve China, to serve the Asian rim. So you're seeing an offsetting of a decline of domestic utilization of steam coal in favor of other types of fuels, with an increase in the demand in the Asian market. You're also seeing an increase in metallurgical coal as the economies start to rebound. So understanding these trends and understanding what they mean and how we can plan, these are daunting challenges. Accusing EPA and the Obama administration of a war on coal, really, it may get a rise out of the audience. It may provide an easy target for blame, but it really is not an accurate depiction of what is going on in the area of environmental protection. The 1990 Clean Air Act, which amended the 1970 Clean Air Act, the 70 Clean Air Act was signed into law by Richard Nixon. The 1990 Clean Air Act was signed into law. It was the last bipartisan effort by George Herbert Walker Bush. And it mandated that pollution from different sources be reduced to levels that protected public health with an adequate margin of safety. So as we learn more about adverse health consequences from ozone and fine particulates and mercury and other pollutants, those standards, which are rigorously vetted, are coming down. And that's requiring that those sources of pollution spend money, which creates jobs in other sectors, in order to address that pollution. So my fear is that we will scapegoat environmental protection laws and regulations rather than understanding that they are an essential part of protecting public health, and that we don't want to traffic in environmental degradation as a way of keeping the coal industry competitive with other fuels.
Joe? So do you feel that Jim is accusing the Obama administration of a war on coal?
He hasn't. I don't know. I've not read anything recently, but that has been the constant chant from. We had actually a trifecta of articles the other day in the Lexington Herald from Senator McConnell, from Representative Barr, who represents the Lexington area, and from Bill Bissett, my colleague over at the Kentucky Coal Association, who are suggesting that the regulatory efforts that are going on under the water discharge program of the Clean Water Act and the dredge and fill program that the Corps of Engineers manages, that this is being motivated politically and by a war on coal. In reality, these are the agency is doing its job, and its job is to assure that permits that are issued that authorize the discharge of pollutants into rivers have the appropriate standards. And unfortunately, one of the problems with exposing a significant amount of rock strata that has sulfate-containing materials to air and water is that you end up with levels of conductivity that make it impossible for aquatic life to live in the headwater stream. So there are some concerns, and there are legitimate concerns, that we need to come to closure on what is required under these permits. The problem I have is when you issue there's a bill that has been sponsored by both Kentucky senators that sets firm timeframes on permit issuance or denial decisions. When you do that, you are, depending on whether you're basing those timeframes on whether they're appropriate timeframes. And I have supported timeframes on different things over the years in the state legislature. Okay, where the industry has said we want a time frame on appeals and hearings dealing with coal mining permits. I supported that. Okay, but the concern is simply that right now what happens is the agencies negotiate. They're negotiating with the state. They're waiting on the state right now to come up with a template for these permits. Once that is decided, then the permits will be issued. The concern, though, is the illusion that permitting is the barrier right now to production, and that's simply not the case. These operations that are shutting in because of market conditions and because of the cost of production. If you think that issuing these permits is going to increase production, that's not going to happen because the market demand is not there. It may change who does the production, but it's kind of, the fear is that you're going to scapegoat the permitting process rather than recognizing that there are fundamental economic drivers that we need to understand, we need to prepare for.
So in the last minute, can you offer some solutions that
Sure.
might help?
Well, I think the solution. Yeah, I think the solution we need in terms of the economic development in Appalachia, we need to take a portion of the severance tax money and put it into a trust fund. And that trust fund would then spin off interest that you would utilize for the infrastructure, for education, for seed money, for entrepreneurship, for other types of employment. We have a significant amount of resources. 3 of the major river systems in the eastern United States, begin in Letcher County in eastern Kentucky, and there are other assets, including a trained workforce that needs to be retrained. So you take a portion of the severance tax money and you put it into a trust fund, then you take the interest and you utilize that. So we have an ongoing source of money that is available as the new money related to coal extraction declines. In terms of keeping the coal jobs, there are going to be winners and losers in the marketplace. I think what we do is we create job retraining programs. We also move away from the more machine-intensive forms of mining and go back to those forms of mining that created more employment, because the employment loss that occurred in the 50s, again in the 70s, again in the 90s, was related to mechanization rather than any other driver. It was the industry replacing people with machines that were more destructive of the physical environment, that needed a whole lot less people in order to operate them. What we need to do, there are ways to mine coal that are significantly more responsible than what has happened during the past 10 years. And I think we need to look at following, Congress's mandate in 1977 was that the technology should follow responsible mining practices. That has not happened in the intervening 36 years. So solutions.
And we're out of time.
Yeah, so that we'll catch the rest of it.
Yeah, we'll get more.
I just want to clarify, did I hear you say, Tom, that we need less technology, more manual labor?
No, I think what you're looking at is using mining technology that is more appropriate for the terrain, okay? And which is less destructive, because there used to, a significant amount of the employment loss that is structural employment loss. Up until 2000, you still had increases in productivity per person. Okay? You had a whole lot less people employed because you bring in one huge drag line rather than doing contour mining. You've idled a significant number of miners. So it's a matter of trying to lighten the footprint of mining while retaining more jobs.
Okay, what I'd like to do next, Lynn, would you mind reading both sides of the board? Just so that you all have a very concise understanding of what the needs, fears, and solutions are of each side. And then what we're going to do is have you all, we're not yet ready for extensive audience participation, but anyone who has other needs and fears that are not represented on the board, we want you to come to the mic and we'll list those. So just like 30-second mic participation after Lynn reads. Go for it.
Okay, so Jim said his needs were to balance the economy and the environment, weigh the true costs, better economic development in Appalachia. It's a question of the type of energy being answered by the market and not by regulation, to keep coal jobs, new ideas, and renew the balance of power between the federal government and the states. Jim's fears were an imbalanced approach uses environmental regulation as a political tool, further economic burdens on Kentucky's households, loss of businesses that rely on lots of energy, specifically aluminum, steel, and automotive industries, and the flip side to that coin, losing the competitive advantage to attract new businesses, loss of coal jobs affecting other jobs, being a multiplying effect, and the coal industry will not rebound, the fear that the coal industry not rebound. His solution was to limit the scope of federal regulatory power over Kentucky coal without lowering standards.
Okay.
Is that good? Tom's needs were assure the protection of health, air, water of those downstream from the mines, needing an understanding of the drivers of the lower unemployment and an economic input in eastern Kentucky, understanding of the market, specifically the steam coal market, understanding the shift in the energy industry, and understanding how coal is being priced out of the market, which relates to one of the fears. So the fears were, because we do the absolute minimum under federal mandate, that we won't even keep up with that without the federal mandate, that we are unprepared to deal with having tied our economy to low energy costs, and that coal is being priced out of the market, that we can't transition to a more diverse economy, the fear that we can't, a fear about understanding the complexity of the coal energy industry, and the fear of making environmental laws and regulations a scapegoat rather than seeing them as protections, the illusion that permitting is the barrier. And the solution was to take a portion of the severance tax fund and create a trust fund, the interest of which would be a new source of money for new economic development in the region, and to create jobs with more responsible ways of mining, less destructive, more appropriate to the terrain.
Okay. When we've done these events in the past, we had the panelists put their needs and fears on the board, and substantial members of the audience did not see their needs and fears represented on the board. And so during the next open discussion, they went nuts because they're like, wait a minute, y'all aren't even talking about what needs to be done. So we want to give you all an opportunity. If there are some needs or fears that are not represented, what we don't want yet are your solutions. But if you do have needs that are not represented on the board, then Tom, you're first. You get to come to the mic. Go ahead, Lynn. And let us know. We don't want long treatises here, but any short needs or fears that are not represented on the board, please go.
Okay. Yep, it's on. I have 30 seconds, and I have two fears. One is that if the states regulate themselves in these kinds of areas, you have a tragedy of the commons issue where individuals themselves won't put effort into a common resource. If you need a central authority to push people to do that. And they know they benefit from it, but they won't put the investment into it. So my fear is that if the states manage these kinds of things, air, water, those kinds of things will be left to just get worse. Because, well, why don't they pay for it? That kind of thing.
Okay.
And then one other, slipped my mind. Can I come back?
Yes, you may.
I have a couple. One of the biggest things I see left out here is the need for the influx of technology into these areas for solutions to the problem. And what I'm hearing is, and I've been in the coal industry for 30 years, and what I'm seeing here is people making statements that do not understand or have not been apprised of the technology that exists today to solve these problems that are being used as problems. So I am more towards the solution side,
Okay.
but my fear is that the technology is not being communicated,
Okay.
and it's not being utilized.
Okay.
Because industry is always 20 to 30 years behind technology.
And we will have more opportunity at the end for audience participation such as solutions. So we'll come back to
Okay.
those.
All right.
Okay, good.
I believe that we have a need for the state to actually enforce the laws that are on its books. And my fear is that what we're going to end up with is business as usual and the death of the economy in Eastern Kentucky.
Okay. Get it?
Yeah. Just quickly, the thing that's missing is anything about the 400 parts per million of carbon that we've just crossed, and that is a real scientific problem. And so the coal is going to be reducing. I mean, I can, that my opinion is that use of coal is going to come down, and I believe it's going to come down really fast at some point in the next 10, 15 years. And
you all did notice Tom's rewording there because he and I have had dinner multiple times, and he was like, no, clarify my opinion. Thank you.
Was that a fear?
it's a fear and a need, but fear, yeah, that states regulating themselves, it's a tragedy of the commons kind of thing. But the fear, actually the fear on the climate change is tragedy of the commons. The fear is, just repeating what he said, is that when I believe the coal production and use is going to the floor is going to fall out, and that will leave Eastern Kentucky completely lost. So.
I have one need and one fear. I think they're related. I think this was hit on before, but might not have made the board. One need might be state sovereignty of our energy sector. Kentucky's energy sector is separate from North Dakota's. It's a lot different from California's. So the fear is having a one-size-fits-all environmental program for the entire nation when the details are different state by state. So my fear is that this one-size-fits-all might be good for a state like California, not good for a state like Kentucky when you weigh the costs and benefits. So the state sovereignty is, those are my two needs and fears related to state sovereignty.
Okay, thank you.
I have one more. He brought up the carbon. And we all know, and we all watch political elections, and our biggest fear is that this carbon CO2 global warming issue, which is a highly politically charged issue, is that not the driving force behind the regulations of mercury, SOx, and NOx? Because we don't see in the legislation from the administrations that being able to be passed through Congress. So, subsequently what we see is the infringement on the state of Kentucky, the state of Indiana, the state of Ohio, to be regulated on mercury, on NOx, and SOx.
Help me out with what your need and fear is there.
Well, that this is a political agenda, and it's not an economic agenda or a health agenda.
So is this similar then, a similar fear to what Jim's first was, an imbalanced approach uses the environmental regulation as a tool, as a political tool? That was your...
Exactly.
Okay, good. And we've got that on the board. That's good.
Right, and then by virtue of attacking the details rather than attacking the real political issue.
Okay. Good.
Say that one again, attacking.
The agenda is carbon, but they can't get that through Congress, so they attack the mercury, the SOx, and the NOx. It's a means.
Recognize the agenda is carbon.
Yes, it's a means to the end.
Okay, Bowen?
One of the things it seems that hasn't been discussed is some of the benefits of the offshoots of what the coal industry has produced in the state of Kentucky almost by accident, such as the mountaintop renewal projects that have gone on, and the fact of the Kentucky elk herd now being the largest in the eastern United States, east of the Mississippi River, which was a direct offshoot of the byproduct of the coal industry, and they're thriving now in this state. And some of the benefits that have occurred almost by accident, and also probably by regulation as well as that's occurred too. So there's a benefit on both sides that's occurred, one by regulation and one by virtue of what's occurred as a result of economic drivers in the free marketplace.
So is there a need that you're referring to
A
specifically?
need not to ignore the benefits that have come out of it,
Okay.
because I think that's some of the things that we don't see,
Okay.
some of the positive effects.
Good.
I kind of have a fear that we as a state sort of cling to coal because it's historically been good to us and sort of miss out on the opportunity for renewables and other resources as well, because as been mentioned a bunch of times, coal is seemingly on the way down. There's a lot of opportunity in these other markets for resources, and I worry that because we have jobs locked up in coal now, and because it's been historically good to us, that we sort of politically focus on what we have and are afraid of change.
Okay. Anybody else? Martina, you look like you're dying to say something. Okay. I think we're ahead of schedule. Is that right, Donna? Fantastic. All right.
We can fix it.
Yes. So we were about to get behind schedule again. So I would suggest that panelists, you can rise and have at it. So at this point in the conversation, you all just talk to each other. Say anything you want to say like you would normally say it. And there will be, I don't know, a few times throughout the evening where we the coaches, will pause. So if you see us raise or toss a flag, just finish your thought. Then we'll pause and we'll talk through the mindset that we would like you to adopt.
Okay. Well,
Free game.
I've gone first. I might as well go first. Question, I haven't heard you talk much about a concern for the cost of what it takes, what it costs for the coal industry to meet regulations. We talked about that in the opening about the cost particularly versus the benefits. And I'm concerned that the coal industry, if listening to you, that the coal industry could never, ever do enough to satisfy, the standards. Can it, and what would those be? And And should there be concern here about just because something brings some type of benefit? I mean, if something costs $100, but if something benefits to the tune of $100, but it costs $200 to fix it, how do we address that? That's how I see this. That's how I see the tremendous burden that's been placed on our coal industry, and they've spent it a lot of times, and there have been some benefits. But what about the cost? What do you think about the cost of some of these regulations?
Well, I think it's an interesting question. In order to understand the role that costs play, which I think Congress got it right when they designed the Clean Air Act the way they did. It was the last bipartisan piece of environmental legislation that was passed by Congress and signed into law by George Herbert Walker Bush, who was then president. Congress mandated that the EPA adopt standards for the 6 criteria pollutants that then added lead. And those are nitrogen oxide, NOx, SOx, sulfur dioxide, and the ozone-producing chemicals, which are the NOx and the volatile organic chemicals that in the presence of sunlight create ground level ozone, and particulate matter. They said, EPA, you are to use peer-reviewed science, health science. You are to set the standard at a level that protects public health with an adequate margin of safety to account for the fact that our understanding of human immunology and toxicology is very primitive. And you are to review it every 5 years, and you are to ratchet the standard down as necessary to ensure that protection. So the process was put in place in 1990, and it has been very successful. We have seen a significant reduction in all of the major criteria pollutants, even as the GDP has increased and as employment increased. The cost benefit is overwhelmingly in favor of these controls in terms of avoided injury, avoided illness, avoided premature mortality, morbidity associated with cardiopulmonary, cardiovascular exposure, illnesses of asthma in children, lost days of work because of these injuries. There have been scores of cost-benefit studies, all of which come up with the conclusion that the Clean Air Act has been a sound investment for the economy. And when you talk about the costs...
Can I ask, do you agree? And I'm pausing here more because
like
you're stating it as reality, so I'm just making sure.
I guess the problem I have with that is that it should be the industry determining what it's going to spend and what it's going to do rather than these things being done by the federal government. And I think there's incentive to do the right things. I think if you allow the marketplace to work with reasonable regulations, a reasonable level of regulations, that it can work. But everything that you're saying that I'm hearing is that Kentucky, has this huge problem with pollution and this huge problem, and it needs a huge bureaucracy in Washington to fix it. And I'm looking here, and since 1990, sulfur dioxide, certain NOx emissions are both down by about 75% in Kentucky, which is a result of the technology, the scrubbers, the low sulfur coal, the selective catalytic reduction machines. And in fact, even more so since 2008, there's sort of been a speeding up of the improvements as sulfur dioxide emissions down 28% in Kentucky just since 2008, and NOx are down by even more than that, 49%. And so yet, though, we have these rules that are these MATS rules, these mercury rules that are going to require $10 billion in cost, but because of the improvements that have been made in the environment here in the pollution as far as these numbers go, that the benefits are going to be minimal because we've already made such good progress with air and water, developing clean air and clean water.
Well, it's interesting, this Secretary Gwen Peters, who was the Secretary of the misnamed Energy and Environment Cabinet, which I criticized at the time they were put together because I think that's fundamentally should be in two separate agencies so that your missions are not confused, suggested that we shouldn't be revising the standards every health-based standards every 5 years because it's too expensive for industry and the benefits are minimal. In fact, the benefits of adopting the new ozone standard, which the Clean Air Science Advisory Committee, which is the who's who of pulmonary and respiratory physicians that are vetted for conflicts and are put in there specifically to be an independent review body, have suggested that thousands of lives would be saved by these additional controls, by lowering the ozone level even further. For many of these pollutants, there's no therapeutic level. There's no level you wake up and say, I like a little bit of mercury in my breakfast cereal.
Yeah, but Tom, we're not debating though. We're not debating climate change. We're not debating the latest scientific, journal on climate change. We're debating whether more control should be given to the state in regulating what's already the standards that are already there. Am I correct?
John, I think what you miss is that the reductions that have occurred didn't occur because the industry, the utility industry, woke up one day and said, I think I'm going to control these sulfur dioxides because I'm really concerned about the impacts on the New England area of acid deposition. These were federally mandated standards that the state of Kentucky implemented under a federal
Federally mandated, we're not arguing. I agree that there should be. You're misrepresenting my position.
No, I'm not.
My position is not that we should leave it up to industry to regulate themselves when it comes to the environment. We're talking about where that regulatory oversight should occur. And we believe that should occur at the state level and we believe that the state has allayed, and I know there were several fears expressed in the comments about whether or not the state would actually do that. If we didn't know that they had made these kinds of steps and made this kind of progress, I think that would be a more legitimate assumption.
But they hadn't made that progress without the federal intervention. Tom's point earlier.
I need proof of that one.
Well,
I need
you
proof.
have decades of proof of that.
But I need proof that they made the progress because of the federal agency enforcing it, not because of the mandates. We agree with the mandate. We think the mandates ought to be there.
Well, the mandates are federally mandated standards and processes that if the state didn't follow, the federal government would do themselves. Now, Kentucky has delegated authority for air, waste, water, and mining programs. In fact, the only federal permit that's issued is under the Corps of Engineers' responsibility because the state decided it didn't want the Section 404 program. The point I'm making, and maybe I am misunderstanding you, is that the improvements that have been made have occurred because of a regulatory framework that requires the industries to internalize
That's the problem.
the pollution costs.
We're getting right down to the heart of it. And the heart of the problem is that I don't hear any confidence at all from you in our business industry to hear, not just you, but to hear this whole narrative about business. There's no allowance there for the fact that these people who own coal mines and work in coal mines, they live in those communities. And if I have a lot more faith in them and in their individual circumstances than I do a regulatory agency 500 miles away from there. I think that we would actually have a better environmental situation. We would have less pollution, but we would have it in a way that fits Kentucky, like the statement was earlier. We wouldn't have standards imposed upon Kentucky that are imposed on California or Arizona or some other place. Every state is unique. It has its own differences. So I guess the question I have is, why do you assume that if we left this up to the states, that we would have dirty air, dirty water, many more people would die if we left not the mandates, but the enforcement of the mandates up to the states?
One of the exists that the reason that Congress inserted itself in using the Commerce Clause into clean water issues was because the very tragedy that comes that Tom had mentioned, left to their own devices, the states were not effectively addressing pollution. There are a number of drivers that were causing the states to either not have rigorous enough regulation. Part of it is protection of your own industry. Part of it is a concern that you're going to drive industry away. And this is not my observation.
Well, no, I'm not
This
saying,
is
well,
Congress.
take a breath, take a breath. Left, we're not saying left to their own devices. We're not saying that.
Well, my suggestion.
You're categorizing my view as something that's not inaccurate.
You are separating out a federal mandate from enforcement of that mandate in a way that I simply fail to see the distinction. The federal government's role has been to stop the states from trafficking in environmental degradation by setting nationally minimum standards for discharges into the air, discharges onto land, or discharges into the groundwater,
and I allow that if that was continuing to happen, I would totally agree, and I would say, and as I said earlier, that may actually be an issue in some states. But this question here is not about other states. This is about Kentucky and what's going on. Yeah.
Congress intervened in 1972 with the Clean Water Act, 1970 with the Clean Air Act, 1977 with the Surface Mining Act, because the states were not effectively regulating pollution. We have made significant progress under that federal mandate. Are you suggesting that the political and economic drivers have changed and that free of the obligation to meet these federal goals, that the state would voluntarily do more than the
See, well, here's the thing is, if whatever the state's doing, I'm not really so concerned about whether it's the minimum or how you characterize it. What I'm concerned about is our air cleaner? Is our water cleaner? Do we still have as serious of problems? Have we made great progress? And we have. And I will allow for the fact that some of that is, in fact, because of an increased awareness of the importance of those issues and I would even say it maybe perhaps in some cases, some federal mandates. But there's nothing that says that a federal mandate has to be enforced by the federal government. If the goal here really is to have the cleanest air, water, and we agree on that. We do. We disagree on how to get there, but we do agree on that. But if that's the goal, then why should it matter who enforces that? You know what I'm saying as far as the mandate goes. Whether it's a mandate from the federal government and it's enforced by the states, then I say that's a great discovery that we've made in the history of federalism, which is that there could be a mandate that generally speaking the country believes in and believes needs to exist, but that the enforcement of that mandate should not be at the hands necessarily of a federal agency who does not appreciate, who does not understand, and does not know about the needs of Kentuckians, not at least as well as those of us who live here.
But all of these mandates are enforced by the state in the first instance. The federal government has backup authority in the event that the states aren't fulfilling the mandate that they said they are willing to enforce. The 1982 decision by the Federal Office of Surface Mining to give Kentucky primary regulatory authority over mining resulted about 10 years after that in a settlement that was based on a lawsuit that I participated in, where the state was not writing notices of violation, was not enforcing those notices of violation, was not issuing cessation orders, was not in fact doing the very things that it had committed to do.
Right. But for right.
Part because
Yep.
the legislature had not given
But for
the resources.
yeah.
So what happened is Congress gave $13 million to the state to hire the inspectors to do the job. So my point is, the states do
But
enforce these mandates in the first instance, but there is a legitimate role for congressional oversight to ensure that the states
But Tom, we've seen.
to the historic practice.
But Tom, we've seen cases where the federal government has failed, and I'm not here to suggest at all that the state would achieve perfection necessarily in every case. But you're not acknowledging that at all here. You haven't talked anything about the mining accidents that have occurred, the lack of safety, enforcing safety regulations that come from the federal government and that are to be enforced by the Mine Safety and Health Administration. And so here we have an instance with several, and there's been several mining accidents and then later it's been discovered that that the rules were not enforced. So my point only is not to. It is to acknowledge. It is actually, I'm acknowledging that some of what you said I agree with, and that is that there's not going to be perfection. But to pick out instances where there wasn't, and say, because of that, then now in 2013, because of something that happened in 1965, that now in 2013, that somehow or other that situation applies to now. And somebody mentioned technology. I think there's been a great use of technology. I think the coal industry would be insulted. Some of the owners who've worked hard and spent a lot of money on technology to think that was not being acknowledged here tonight. So, it's made an improvement.
That's a great segue. And I actually met the guy who invented this segue. But he is a very odd individual, but a very brilliant one. The issue, one of the issues that really we haven't talked about, and I was really glad somebody brought it up, is carbon. Okay? Now, the NOx and SOx rules, I understand the concern that there's some hidden agenda there, but those rules do not address carbon. Okay? They are, and what is fascinating about technology is if you allow the marketplace sufficient time, and this has been shown again and again and again, we have risen to the occasion in terms of developing pollution control technologies. There are hundreds of thousands of jobs that have been created in pollution control technologies in order to address that pollution that is now being required to be internalized. So the issue of carbon is a significant uncertainty right now. Okay? EPA has moved forward because Congress, after almost getting there, Senator McCain and others, Joe Lieberman, were pushing a comprehensive program, the cap and trade idea, which is vilified, but actually was an industry idea under the 1990 Clean Air Act that worked really well in reducing sulfur dioxides in a way that allowed the industry to maximize the efficiency of its investment by not putting controls on each smokestack. Similarly,
but how's that?
What do you do?
How's that apply to this question?
The question is, what is EPA going to do? Right now, they've given a pass to all existing coal-fired plants. And what they've said is, for the new plants, you are going to have to, over a 30-year period, this hasn't been finalized yet, they said you are going to have to capture a certain amount of the carbon that is emitted from the combustion of coal, and you're going to have to sequester it in some fashion. Well, the reality is right now, there is no effective sequestration technology at the scale that we're looking at. Small amounts of carbon dioxide are in fact utilized for tertiary oil recovery for other purposes, but large-scale geologic sequestration or chemical sequestration, if there's some bench-scale stuff, it really is not available. So
I got a question right there on that. When you talk about certainty, right, and uncertainty, you yourself just said that there is a lot of uncertainty about this, and yet by creating mandates and regulations, even when there is such uncertainty, what is happening is when some of those mandates have been introduced, as we mentioned earlier, many coal plants are saying, we don't even want to do this. We don't even want to try to do this. So they're closing down, like Big Sandy and Louisa. And so what I'm trying to show you is that here's what I see. What I see is that whenever there's uncertainty about whether even a regulation would actually work or not and actually make improvements, you lean toward jumping on that and having mandates in place, even if we agreed on that, would you agree that all of these regulations create uncertainty for investors and miners and operators who are saying, why is it, for example, that Kentucky approved 11 mining permits only to have them overturned by a federal agency? What right does the federal agency have to overturn all of these permits after they had been approved? That kind of thing creates uncertainty. We feel it does. Do you agree? No. Does it create uncertainty? If you don't know what a regulation is going to cost, that's uncertainty. Or unless you have another word for that, but that's what I understand.
Well, when we're looking at the clean air regulations that caused the American Electric Power System to decide to mothball the Big Sandy plant and to purchase power from a separate plant, what you're dealing with is not the uncertainty of regulations that have not been put in place. You're dealing with the cost of compliance versus finding the lowest cost scenario. Because public utility commissions are trying to protect the ratepayers, and they're saying, invest in the lowest cost option. Now, there are legislators in Eastern Kentucky who are concerned that they're losing market share because Big Sandy is no longer.
And they're doing that because of regulation. They're doing that because of that is costing jobs. It's going to cause electricity rates to go up. You yourself just said that.
Shifting employment to a different sector.
And what sector is that, sir?
Natural gas, among others. But what you need to understand.
So should that be, okay, but this is really, I think, important, and I apologize for interrupting, but I think I want to get on this point about, I'll agree with you that those jobs are going to, let's just say they will go to the natural gas. I think some of them actually will. I do agree with that. But the point is, how should those go? How should that be determined? What jobs are created in the coal industry versus what jobs are created in other industries because of circumstances that occur? Here's my point. My point is, I'm going to answer and I'll let you answer. Here's my point. My point is that it's much better for the marketplace to determine that rather than regulation, which I hear you saying it actually did. You're admitting that.
No, the marketplace that is fully actualized, the marketplace that doesn't subsidize pollution with injury and premature mortality. So when you take the ability of a coal-fired power plant to emit mercury, which then becomes methylmercury, which now results in every lake in Kentucky having an advisory telling pregnant women that it is life-threatening to eat too much fish from Kentucky's lakes. That is a subsidy that should be ended by requiring that plant not utilize, without payment, the public's air for the waste disposal. So Jim, we don't disagree.
Okay, you mentioned several times, though. Yeah. You mentioned several times.
Winners and losers be chosen by the efficiency of the production, but you don't make pollution and public health part of the subsidy.
But Tom, but several times you said, several times though you said this, and okay, let me ask you, how serious today in 2013, or will you acknowledge that we have made great strides in improving the air and water pollution levels and lowering those in the state? And
in response to the congressional mandates, we have done a great job.
Okay. Do you and what evidence?
Is that sufficient?
Well, no, I'm not disagreeing with that. We agree. We agree. Could be that. I'm not. I don't think you can necessarily. Well, I think it could be a case made for that. But how do you make the case for the fact that those mandates were carried out from Washington rather than from the state? How do you haven't provided any evidence?
States were incapable and unwilling to do so because the congressional record.
I'm not talking about that. I said 2013. Will you acknowledge, my first question and only question at this point is, will you acknowledge that we have made tremendous strides in Kentucky in terms of improving our air, water, and lowering pollution levels generally overall?
Over the period of time that these federal laws have required us to do so, yes.
Okay, so why do we need, now, if and you mentioned about that we shouldn't make the EPA a scapegoat, and I agree with that. I think we should just say what the truth is about what they've done and observe what they've done and talk about it in those terms. So my question on that would be, if the coal industry is in such decline, and it's been predicted, the demise of the industry has been prophesied here tonight, if that's the case, then why is there this great, tremendous need for more regulation, $10 billion worth of costly regulation that are only going to bring a few $1 million in benefits according to the EPA? Why do we need those if the coal industry already is declining? Why wouldn't we want to invest those funds in, like you said, worker training, additional education programs, maybe even return some of it to taxpayers and increase the coal severance tax, which, by the way, has also been depleted. So you talk about things we could do with this coal severance tax, but if it's depleted, how can we do those things?
So Congress decided when they revised the Clean Air Act in 1990 that every industrial sector that was emitting toxic air pollutants, and they created a list of toxic air pollutants. They drew it from California and New Jersey, who have the two most robust programs, that EPA would study each industry and would require the installation of control technology that was available, that was the maximum reductions available, so that they would do as well as the 12% that was the best within the industry. The utility sector is no different than any other industrial sector. The synthetic organic chemical industry has been going through the MAX standards, and so the MAX standards have been proposed. They are not yet finalized, but there are going to be requirements associated with both applying technology and then potentially dealing with the residual risk and doing even more. Why do you do that? You do that because that's a cost of the utilization of that fuel that shouldn't be passed into the public domain in the form of contaminated fish, in the form of exposure of people to air toxins. So you require those controls. What happens at the Public Utility Commissions is that each company makes a decision, not based on what could be standards in the future. Most of these utility commissions are now considering the likelihood that there will be carbon controls within the lifetimes of these plants that are going to last 40, 50, 60 years. And they should be considering that. But based on the existing mandates, what's happening is the utilities are saying it is cheaper for me to put together, to do a gas plant that is going to double the efficiency, a combined cycle gas plant, than to utilize a coal plant that is aging, that is 25% efficient in the conversion of the fuel. It is a lower cost to my ratepayers.
Well,
So
I think we're
internalize the cost.
I think we're at an impasse here on this because I agree that should happen. It's just how that should happen, you know? And so we're just, you know, we have a real difference on that, I think, on how, I do agree that mandates in some form can be helpful in lowering pollution, but at some point in time, we have to look at other factors involved with that as well. And so I think I'd like to hear, I think it's a little bit of an unbalanced or imbalanced approach not to also talk about the cost of these and what it's costing, not just in terms of what it's going to cost to clean the air and pollution, but what the terms of the cost it's going to have on people in those areas. After all, when we take money out of one sector of the economy and put it into another, there's going to be many people who are harmed. And so, and there's going to be winners and losers. But if that occurs because natural gas continues to make progress, which we have a lot of that in eastern Kentucky as well, which I was impressed with, by the way, when I went out there and looked at how much there was. But we don't know that that's for sure. And the market, see, the government can't determine that nearly as well as the market can. A government agency cannot determine what's going to happen in the marketplace near as well as the market itself. The market is much more knowledgeable about what's going to happen.
I wanted to see if I could hit principle number 7. Is that okay? Because there seems like a core philosophical difference that you all got so close to, and I wanted to see if I could clarify.
We didn't accuse, though, did we?
No, I've got to commend you guys. You're making it almost impossible to enforce these because you all are so
I'm trying to
eloquent
enforce them on
and
myself,
congenial.
Actually, this is more fun than I thought it was going to be. I was worried about this.
Absolutely. I think
So you're asking what the difference?
Yeah, let me
define the
I
core
wanted to recap what you guys, some things you guys just said, and I believe that Tom said that the state right now has primary authority over regulating coal, and that the federal government is only there in a backup capacity. And so you're going to have to tell me whether I've got this really, really wrong or not. Because basically you were saying that the state has primary authority over regulating coal and that the federal government only steps in a backup capacity. And see, you're wincing over there.
Well,
I don't think you agree with it. Do you agree with that or don't agree with that?
Well, if that's the case, then why not go ahead? Because our Interstate Coal and Use Act says that you can't lower the federal standards that have been put in place. It's not about.
that's not what the bill says, but maybe
It's not. It's what it says, and we can talk about it. But that's what it says, and that's the intent of it, and that's what it says. It says that you cannot lower mandates that are already in place. That is not the issue. The issue is not the mandates that are in place. The issue is how they are enforced. And the reason that's important is we have had 11 mining permit applications that were approved by the state. If the EPA is only sitting back there in the background and not really involved in this, then how is it that 11 permits, which represent conservatively 1,000 jobs here, how is it that they were overturned by a federal agency after the state had approved them? And they were approved here by people living in our Commonwealth. I think that's legitimate.
Let me answer that. I think it is legitimate. There are two permit programs that issue here. One is what's called the 402 program. This is the Pollutant Discharge Elimination System permit. Congress set a goal of ending water pollution by 1985. We're a little bit behind on that. But what it says is you've got to meet the standards for iron, manganese, pH, and settleable solids at the end of your sediment pond under certain storm conditions. Under other conditions where you have a big storm event, you relax some of those standards because you're trying to deal with precipitation-induced discharges. They also said, so that applies to any coal mining operation. In Western Kentucky and Eastern Kentucky, it applies generally. There's a second set of standards which are intended to protect the stream. And those standards are not the same when you're in the Ohio River, which has a tremendous amount of dilution, as they would be in a stream that dries up during the 7-day period over a 10-year cycle, which is the law.
So is this an exchange? I have a question about that. I have a question about that.
Ask me a question, I'm trying to...
Well, okay, I've got a question to follow up.
Let me explain what has been happening. The state has had data collected by a state employee who now works for the Fish and Wildlife Service indicating that there were problems with conductivity, that the sulfate concentrations coming out of valley fills where you have disturbed a significant amount of strata, some of which is sulfate or carbonate containing, and the levels of conductivity are higher than aquatic life can support. Now, a standard that we've had on the books for years said that you don't issue a permit where it's going to cause a violation of this water quality standard, which is that you don't adversely affect the physiological health of aquatic species. The state had not been addressing that in the cycles of issuing these permits. EPA finally put a marker down and said, you've got to address this. Now, I've suggested a solution for how to address it. Rather than putting a hard numerical standard in place, there are, and somebody talked about the technology, there are ways to mine and to construct your fills and to limit the amount of disturbance at any time that will greatly lower conductivity value.
But the levels, Tom, are already low. I mean, the EPA has said that any water discharged from a coal mine has to have less than 500 microsiemens. And they've actually apparently lowered that to 300. But if you go to a stream out in the woods, and I've asked environmental experts this, and this is opinion based on my conversation with knowledgeable people in this area. They say if you go to a stream out in the woods, it's going to have 1,200 microsiemens. So the EPA has set the coal mining industry, I believe, by doing this, it appears to me that they have set it up where it is an unreachable standard.
Okay, let me give you a reference, because this is a fascinating issue, and I hope people...
And that's about the conductivity level. It's even more strict
Go to the EPA's website
than it should be.
and look at the spruce mine. This is the big controversial one over in West Virginia, where the state had approved the construction of a number of fills to put the excess rock material, because when you mine an area, there's a swell, and even if you put the material back on the bench, there's going to be some additional rock to get rid of. So these are the valley fills where you're putting them in place. What the spruce mine data show is that the undisturbed streams have conductivity levels well below the levels that EPA thought are of concern to aquatic life. Okay? So the natural conditions are not going to be in 1,200. There's data there that shows in those watersheds that would be affected by the spruce mine that the natural numbers were much lower than that. In some disturbed watersheds, you're going to be in a difficult position because the background levels may be elevated to the point where you have to completely control your conductivity numbers at a lower level than that because the stream is already impaired. And there's a program for trying to deal with these impaired streams. We have a lot of impaired streams, not just from mining, not just from sediment, not just if we have a lot that are impaired excessive nutrients, because of poor waste management practices in certain areas of the state. So this is not the only source of water pollution concerns in the Commonwealth. Well, what's happened is EPA and the state disagree on what these permits should contain. Now, the other issue that's going on is the Corps of Engineers. EPA has, in the history of this program since 1972, only vetoed 13 authorizations to place this fill material in headwater streams, 13 of them. What happens in the bulk of the cases is they negotiate. And as was mentioned before, there are ways to mine without building valley fills in headwater streams. Companies are doing
But
it every day.
can you understand why we might be skeptical about that? In terms of, well, in skeptical of the fact that the goal of the EPA in dealing with these permits is simply about the pollution levels in the water. Well, I want to believe that, but I have a hard time believing that. And
We're supposed to believe that everybody is...
okay, no. Well, what am I'm not breaking
Don't
it.
tease, we're serious.
When Alan and I met, he said,
I'm not
it seems that everybody's motivated by good. And I'm like,
okay, I think I will break.
Let's clarify that. Not in every action is our intent positive,
Well,
but overall we all
right.
have
And
positive
if we
intent.
can let me ask this. If I can clearly show why I have a problem because of things that have been said in the public sphere, then that's what I'm trying to do. I'm not pulling something.
agencies ever overreach?
I'm not talking, well, I'm talking about federal, right. But there is,
Systems in order to
right.
rein in the agencies. Let me get
There is but no, you talk, and I let the filibuster go on. Now I'm going to say this, but there's disagreement, and it's not disagreement between the state EPA or the state environmental cabinet and the EPA. It's simply delay. I agree that there should be sufficient time for these permits to be decided upon. But, Tom, we're not talking here about sufficient time, in my opinion. I think 5 years is insufficient. And then the reason I have a problem with this is in 2008, the EPA's current boss, as a candidate, said that as president, he would set policy that would bankrupt the coal industry. So, and I'm quoting, so if somebody wants to build a coal-powered plant, they can. It's just that it will bankrupt them because they're going to be charged a huge sum for all that greenhouse gas that's being emitted. And the problem with that is he's not acknowledging the progress that states have made. That sounds like, can you understand? I'm not saying you have to agree with my point, but can you understand how I'm hearing that? Can you understand that? And so because of that, following that statement, he won election, and now we have had permits that involve not pollution that crosses state lines, not cross-state air pollution. I'm not talking about that. We're talking about the 404 permits and the 402 permits. One would allow for the water, that has the water discharge, it involves that. The other is the soil removal. And so let me ask you this. Can you agree that there apparently needs to be a deadline put on the EPA because they are not effectively in the permitting process, it's not effective.
And let me just point out here, this is a perfect time for Ground Rule 3 for you to understand and care about the other side's needs, fears, and proposed solutions. So especially fears, does that make sense? Okay, I'm just asking you to address whether you can...
Two issues there. Let me address the last one first. Should there be a reasonable time frame in which a permit decision is made? Yes. In this instance, if you look at the correspondence back and forth between the agencies, there has been, I think, an inordinate delay in coming to closure on this. On the 402.
Why is that?
Because they are both trying to address the how to get to a goal that I think everybody shares, which is how to stop impairing headwater streams. My suggestion has been give the industry flexibility to use different best management practices, and let's see what works. That is not a suggestion I think goes to the state, but the state and federal government.
I actually like that suggestion.
Well, they've been going back and forth on this, and they're coming close
Victory.
to closure. Okay? But I'd love you to send me that quote, that supposed quote from the president about bankrupting coal.
Yeah, right here it is, yeah. Well, I can send you the,
Yes.
I can send you the link. I have another question on that, though. And I have another question, and then you can talk some more. I have another question. According, and I read this, according to a new Duke University study, pending regulations conclude that offer tougher air quality standards that would make 2/3 of the nation's coal-fired power plants more expensive to operate than comparable natural gas-fired facilities. And if the price of natural gas soared 4 times higher than what it currently trades for, which you can't, or nobody can say won't happen, the cost of operation between the two systems would simply be comparable, would it not?
Well,
So what
happens, and this is the difficulty that every public utility commission faces, and this was a problem with a couple of the nuclear plants that were proposed in the Ohio Valley. You were trying to predict what the trends will be in the future. You're making what you think is the most prudent decision at the time in whether to buy power, which is what Kentucky Power decided to do, whether to build a coal-fired plant, whether to build a natural gas plant. Ideally, you have the most nimble mix of various energy sources available so that if natural gas spikes, you can power up your coal-fired plants. If natural gas drops, that you can utilize the natural gas plants that you have in order to meet that demand. This sort of balancing goes on all the time. In the evening, LG&E backs off its coal-fired production and it buys nuclear from Chicago because it's coming in at a fraction of the cost. So there's this constant balancing that's going on. And the utilities are trying to figure out, and the regulatory landscape is a piece of it. But you've hit the nail on the head. I haven't read the Duke study, but I've read a number of other studies that indicate, particularly the Energy Information Administration, the price of shale gas at this point, and for the next foreseeable future, 4 or 5 years, will remain lower than the benchmark cost of Appalachian coal.
Okay, then let's
we're seeing a shift
right,
towards
that's a great reason for less regulation of the coal industry and more of the state level regulatory oversight to handle that. If the coal industry, if it's declining, but
market share.
But why not? Why not?
It's not related to the environmental impacts associated with underregulated mining and underregulated.
So I get back to my question is, why do we even have state? What is the purpose, in your view, why do you think that the founders of our nation created 50, as Justice Louis Brandeis said one time, 50 laboratories of democracy called states? If there is no difference in the way that regulation should be enforced and it should be done at the federal level, the mandates should all come from Washington, why don't we just get rid of all the state borders and just kind of have one big government and one, maybe even just get rid of the sovereignty of the whole nation and just have, so we can solve this global climate change problem, just have it one government somewhere.
Correct, because the founders, to their credit, recognize that there is a balance between the enumerated powers given to a central government that are necessary to keep a nation healthy and keep a nation prosperous and keep a nation defended, and the responsibilities that are retained by the states as not having been enumerated in the Constitution. One of those powers is Article 1, Section 8, Clause 3, which is the Commerce Clause, and the power to regulate commerce among the states. Why did the federal government become involved in this?
But we're talking here about...
They became involved because the states were not effectively controlling pollution in
Okay.
their borders and
Right.
across their borders.
Right. But we're talking about coal that doesn't ever leave Kentucky.
But the impacts of it do.
So
And
what?
the regulation of mining in Kentucky undercuts what happens in West Virginia and in other states. This is the reason Congress became involved.
Yeah.
If you read the House and Senate reports that were signed, the Senate report that Weber Ford had a significant role in, the House report that representatives from Kentucky, representatives from the Western United States, this was a 10-year process to develop a national program because the states had proven themselves incapable or unwilling of bringing their standards up sufficiently to protect people downstream and downhill because of the destructive interstate competition.
Hey, were. That's, I agree. It was.
That's right.
It was.
It's still the same today.
so you're saying,
Those drivers are still there.
okay, so what you're saying is that the state is not capable of and was unwilling to regulate one of its greatest industries, and that it requires the federal government to do that. Is that a fair assessment?
I think the legislative enactment that says we will do no more than the minimum standard under this 1977 federal law speaks volumes.
But the minimum, Tom, the minimum in this case, that's not really, I disagree with the way you've portrayed that. I think it's a little bit misleading. And I don't know if I'm breaking any rules here, but I think it is a little bit, because when you talk about minimum standards, yeah, if the standards are way up here and that's the minimum, and we reach those minimum standards, then I'm okay with the minimum. Why aren't you okay with that?
Because after a brief period of time, from 1977 to 1981, in which the rules were put in place to effectively regulate mining, this law has been in the hands of hostile administrations that have done everything in their power to weaken that federal mandate. Let me give you a classic example.
Okay, we only have 2 minutes, so I want to say one more thing.
What people talk about as being mountaintop removal is not technically classified as mountaintop removal, because what Congress said is, if you are going to mine an area, take the entire ridge over the coal off, and not return it to its original contour, then you are going to have to show us actual plans to develop something that needs that terrain.
And I have stood in the hospitals, I've stood in hospitals, in schools, in economic development areas that have been built on those areas.
2% of the flat land has been put to any beneficial purpose according to these studies. Now, what has happened is...
Well, I talk to the people who live out there.
These mining operations I've represented for 41 years, the folks that are, these mining operations are called area mines by the state agencies. And so I can go in and flatten an area and not have to show that I'm going to build anything on it and get a permit. That is not what Congress intended. Congress intended that mining reclamation follow disturbance as quickly as possible to minimize environmental damage.
Yeah.
That is not what has occurred.
Okay, why don't we each take about 1 minute for a final
Well,
summary?
go ahead, I want to go at the end, so.
Go ahead, final summary.
This has been a blast. All right. We haven't scratched the surface on carbon issues, because that is the 800-pound gorilla that is really affecting any investment in new coal-fired power plants. But that plus the market with shale gas, the regulatory drivers are an issue, and there's a lot that we disagree on. A lot of things we do agree on, but this has been a spirited debate, and I appreciate you very much, Jim. I appreciate the format. This has been fun. I appreciate the fact that we haven't had one flag flown at us.
But Tom,
We'll talk about that in a
Tom,
minute.
but Tom, you came close, okay?
Encourage folks is follow up on this. There are a couple of different studies that were done on the future of coal, one by MIT, one by the National Academy of Sciences, which has been around since the days of Lincoln and is highly regarded, that have looked at coal issues. And what you'll find out is they don't know. They range when you get to 2030, 2040 is 50% more or 20% less coal will be utilized based on what happens with carbon. So that is a significant issue. I would encourage you all to go past the sloganism and to look at the facts and to weed through the facts and go with reputable sources, because in the internet age, there's everything in the world out there from reputable to really ridiculous stuff. And I would encourage you to ground truth everything that I've said. You don't have to ground truth what Jim said, because it's all gospel. But which is appropriate.
We're making progress here.
But again, thank you all for being here.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Coach.
Yeah.
Okay.
What was the Supreme Court at Filburn, right? I want to get the name.
Wickard versus Philpott.
And I want to close with that and just point out that what happened was a farmer in Dayton, Ohio, where I used to live, wanted to sell some wheat off of his used wheat on his farm, and he was he was limited in doing that. I think just like federal agencies and even state agencies can get it wrong, sometimes the Supreme Court gets it wrong. And I think it's time to say what happened 40 years ago or 50 years ago where 10 men sitting in a room made some decision doesn't necessarily mean that that should be the last answer. And even Kentucky's Democratic House Speaker attended a rally in Pikeville in support of Kentucky's coal industry last summer in an attempt to help educate the EPA, who came to Kentucky, courageously enough, on what happened in 1982 when the federal government transferred the responsibility for enforcing some surface coal mining regulations from the federal to the state level, provided that states enacted laws that were at least as stringent as the federal law. Stumbo told reporters that the arrangement has worked for 30 years, but that the EPA now wants to change the rules. This is from the Lexington Herald Leader, and I quote, "They want to change the standard by regulation, not by law. In 2 states, regulators cannot thwart the intent of Congress without an act of Congress." So my point is on the question of should Kentucky be able to regulate at the state level coal that never leaves our borders, we have not heard any evidence constitutionally or legally about why, not evidence that I accept, about why the state should not be allowed to do that. And the evidence is that the state has proven it can make great progress in lessening the amounts of pollution in our air and water. Tom, thank you so much. It's been great. I've enjoyed it. Thanks for having us.
And we're not done. So thank you all both very much. Okay. As Joe alluded to, you all made it tough for us for a couple of reasons. One, because you all were doing a pretty good job of following the ground rules, and I think more so because you all are a runaway train, and it's hard to throw a flag anywhere. So in a good way, this is fantastic, spirited. It's very good. So let me back up and just make a couple of suggestions for future debates. For one, there were a couple of times when you hinted on blame. Specifically, I think, Tom, you're mischaracterizing my argument. That's got a little bit of blame in it. For the most part, blame-free and fantastic, but just border. Yeah, there you go. Better. Or
I said, it's my opinion.
Can I make sure I'm being clear, or something like that would have been a better wording without a hint of blame. A couple of times, Tom, where you were stating things as fact. This is true. This is the reason why, as opposed to I think that this is the reason why. Supporting what that does is it finds common ground between you. It helps the other side hear you better, because if you're stating things as fact, then it's harder to accept from the other side.
So, Alan, what do you
Yes.
think about this? Do we have some common ground tonight?
Oh, there was one, I forget exactly what it was now, but you're probably going to point it out. There were several things that were a lot of common ground. And by the way, we're not necessarily looking for common ground. What we're really looking for is that you're hearing each other's arguments in ways that you weren't before. And I think there were a couple opportunities where you had, for instance, I do hear you caring about the environment a lot. I don't hear you as much caring about the cost of regulation. It was a need of his side that I didn't hear get addressed. So that's the sort of thing, if you can address your arguments so that you are showing that you are caring about the other side, then it helps find that common ground, or at least those better solutions. And I think I want either of the judges, any of the judges, if you all have good or constructive things to say. Jump
Thanks
in.
to the judges, too. Thank you.
Well, when we coached to strengths, and there were many strengths displayed today. Particularly, I think you pointed those out, Alan, so I'm just going to go to, I heard a lot of things, but you were agreed upon. Better water, air, but that's not good enough. We need a change in the coal industry, because it's at the point where it's a mature industry and we must make some differences. Mandates are needed. But it sounded to me like if you could focus a little bit more on 3 and 4, that it was an issue of what are the standards and who is accountable. That's a major issue. I heard cost a lot, but I also heard we need to enhance the coal industry. So while I saw you understanding and caring somewhat about other people's sides, because we listed that, and I saw you not necessarily complaining, I didn't see you coming to propose solutions that met both sides. And that may take...
You lost me on that. Can you rephrase that?
Yes.
Are you talking about, what did you not hear that, again, could you just say that for me? What did you not hear that?
Let me see if I can do that again.
Okay.
What
Just
I
the
said
last part of that, about solutions.
About solutions. Well, I hear you understanding, and there are some areas that you agreed upon. The proposed solutions that met both sides, I didn't hear.
Well, there's not going to be agreement on those. right?
And-
I mean, is
But
that-
what we are actually looking for, and this is what we accomplish in business. In business, we have executive leadership teams where one vice president absolutely believes his way is the only way. The other vice president believes, no, it has to be this way. And when we operate under this set of ground rules, what you see is that you're hearing new needs that my solutions aren't being met. And what that does is forces me to be more inventive so that we do start meeting more of the needs.
Okay.
And if we hear each other's side, this is incredibly effective with our business clients. They start meeting more needs because it forces them to be more inventive.
And-
That's what we're really looking for
And what
here.
I meant was, it seemed to me it was like an issue of accountability. You know, it's the federal regulation, it's the state regulation. So accountability is a big issue. And what are the standards? And this would probably take more than one session, as we see in business, but coming to understanding each other's needs and then meeting where you can have a proposed solution that meets both needs, you know, is something that we would ask you, we would coach you to focus.
Well, that's what I was trying to do when I said, we're not saying, you know, there should not be regulation. There
That's
should
right.
be. That's not the issue. The issue is where it should be done at, and there's not going to be agreement on that.
Which is the
So,
accountability issue.
Yeah, so, but not
Joe?
that there shouldn't be accountability,
Yes,
just
yes.
where it should be.
Where is the accountability?
Yeah,
And
that's-
what are the standards? I
Yeah,
think that's.
that was my view, that's what I heard, yeah.
Any comments, Joe?
I was just going to suggest that that we follow this up with like a series of debates like the Lincoln and Douglas debates.
I agree with that.
Except for it would be the FitzGerald and Waters debates.
We could have some fun with it.
And to that end, because you guys seem to both know the Constitution and how the country was founded pretty well, and that was very impressive.
I can't wait to read your book either.
Okay, good. I'll sign a copy for you. But what I was going to say is in that vein, I think both of you guys hit it right on the head when you started talking, and I'm going to mess this up, but I'm going to get close. Do you agree or disagree that Kentucky ought to be able to regulate how it sets up headwater or something or the other, right? I mean, that was kind of something you threw out, and then you guys started, it seemed like you really started drilling in on, and then if both you guys kind of agreed to that or didn't, then you could start getting some traction about, because that's exactly what you're talking about, right? Those kinds of things, that Kentucky ought to have the primary authority and not have to wait 5 years for a reg to be signed.
Right.
Is that right?
There needs to be movement in the state's directions, in the state's direction.
So then,
Like with the permitting process, what we were saying is, it's been.
Based on my opinion.
Yeah. Well, in the permitting process, there is no pay. It's a fact that they've delayed acting. How you want them to act, that's opinion, but they've delayed taking action on those permits. So that's a fact.
And then Tom could come back and say,
We agreed on that.
either I do
We
or
agreed
do
on
not
that.
agree that the state should have that authority because,
Right.
It's going to
Right.
drive the mercury count through the roof
Right.
or something like that.
see what you're saying.
You know what I'm saying? But I find no fault with anything that you guys have done tonight. I just see it setting up, more
This
focus.
takes more than one session.
Yes, that's what I'm saying.
It's
Yes.
just, not to put it too fine a point, I agree that a timely decision is a reasonable expectation when you have a complete permit that's been submitted. I don't know that they've intentionally delayed, but certainly an answer has not been forthcoming in a. Yeah, I'm sorry. I was just saying, I don't agree that EPA has delayed. I agree that there has been a significant lapse of time before the decisions are made. But I think the state and EPA have been trying to work through these issues, and it is not an easy process. But I don't oppose reasonable timeframes for making decisions. And I know a friend of mine who's in the coal industry has said, just tell us what you want, and we'll try to
There's
accomplish
the
it."
certainty. That's what
Just
we
try,
want, certainty.
tell us what you want. And so I'm hopeful that they're closer now to coming to resolution. I am not aware that the lack of permits has affected the amount of production. It has affected who is producing, but the market will dictate how much coal production occurs.
Well, now that he said I got to answer that, and I agree up to that point, but one of the points I wanted to make was that I think that there has been an increase in coal activity, but we think, and this is strictly opinion based on what we've read and talked to people about, that could have a lot to do with the fact that a lot of that coal in Appalachia in particular had already been removed. And so it takes more resources, more people to get down in there and get more coal out, so there's been increased hiring. I think that's a possibility. That's all I'm saying.
Okay. Lynn? Lynn had some comment about the ground rules.
I wanted to say what a remarkable evening this has been, and thank you to you both for that. And just really point out to all of us that our language is so important to this process. When we say you this or you that, or, that gets really close to making someone else put their defenses up. And
Did we do that? Did we do that?
Yes.
Oh, when
Not
did we do
often,
that?
but there were a couple.
What
Yeah.
were, give me an example of that.
You said,
Well,
You are mischaracterizing my
it's just
opinion.
it's a turn of phrase.
well, if
is all
somebody
it
said
is.
that, I mean, what's the
Well-
problem with saying, that's what
I want to
he
make sure I'm being understood correctly.
And showing
That's
respect
that's
with no
without a
hint
hint
of
of blame.
blame, right? So, yeah, that was one thing I heard tonight. But this is remarkable, and what I want all of us to understand is that this is a new level of political discourse, and it is not easy. There is nothing easy about this conversation. It's why most people don't enter this conversation because they've had it too many times when it wasn't according to these ground rules and
When I
was
started
so.
preparing for this, I said, why did I say yes?
Yes, exactly.
glad you did.
I don't blame you for saying that.
But let me also mention that from my
But I'm
perspective,
glad I did now.
my opinion, from my perspective, the reason we are not getting better solutions these days is because we are not participating in this high character of level of debate. And so this is what we need our
without both sides,
politicians
we
to do.
can't. So no matter which side you tend to resonate more toward, without both sides represented of a debate, we can't have this conversation and how powerful it is. And so thank you, Alan, for bringing us to this point.
Bless you, Lynn. Okay, so we have eaten into the audience participation time. So anyone that wants to talk, we give you no more than 3 minutes, either to say a comment or a question to the panelists. But we will time you, and we will also throw a flag if we hear blame. So thank you. Jump in.
Thank you. A question for Tom. Just a very brief background. About 3 years ago, my daughter married into a coal mining family out of Letcher County. The unintended benefit of that is I learned a lot about the coal business, which I wouldn't have had nothing to know other than that. My interview with these families, when they spoke with the EPA, I think they, and this is somewhat anecdotal, I understand, but I think they kind of wanted to know who controls the decision-making. One coal miner said, I was told that lake stream water has to be as pure as my tap water. Is that based on what? I know there was a bill in Congress floating around a while back that any bill that was more than $100 million worth of costs had to go through congressional approval. Last I heard, that hadn't gone anywhere. I guess my question, I think these coal miners' questions were, where's the controls? It seems to me the controls is whatever administration's in. One administration comes in and goes one way, the next administration goes this way, but these departments don't appear to be accountable to anybody. If one of them goes off on tangents, who are they accountable to?
Good question.
And try to keep it to 1 minute
Yeah,
if we
they're
can.
accountable to the courts. That's why we have, the Congress sets out the parameters, the agencies implement those mandates, and then the courts hold the agencies in check. For an example, EPA had issued a guidance that was being utilized as if it was a rule, right? You can't do that. You're supposed to go through a rulemaking process where you actually publish, get comment, and you justify the rule that you're putting in place. That's what the Administrative Procedure Act requires. EPA had not done that. The courts held them and said, you were violating the EPA. So the courts are there to hold the agencies in check. Also, the elected officials are there in terms of their budget, in terms of the number of budget riders over the years that they've considered, where the will of the Congress is that the agencies are out of bounds. But they have a mandate, they have judicial review which tests their compliance with that mandate. And I fully support it. Folks believe that an agency has abused that mandate, test it. And every one of these major air standards we've been talking about have been judicially tested and upheld.
Okay. Next.
Hi there. I didn't see us focus a whole lot on solutions. I heard us debate issues, and I heard us throw out issues about technology and stating fact like they were fact when Some of the facts I know after 30 years of experience being old fact, that were old technologies that were possibly true 30 years ago. But the government agencies and industry is 30 years behind technology, and that's a fact. And when I train and do reorganizational reengineering into General Motors plants and Ford plants 10 years ago, they were 30 years. And the example that I always use is that when do you think the fax machine was first commercially available? Well, most people started using them around the 1980s, 1982, but really it was introduced in 1950 at the World's Fair. So the industry is 20 to 30 years behind technology. And the point is that people from my level, the corporate level, and I've worked for some big companies, and now we do consulting work on our own. We have the technology to solve these problems, but we can't get access to the government officials. We can't get access to the public utilities. We can't get access to the politicians that are driving the political agendas. They don't want to hear from us.
Well,
for example.
Oh, I thought you were done.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I'll do my 3 minutes. And then
Okay.
you guys can answer.
My apologies.
We contacted senators, and so we contacted congressmen. If you all probably heard this, Georgia Power has recently announced that they're closing 52 coal power generation facilities. We contacted the board of directors. I wrote a letter myself to the board of directors of Georgia Power, no response. And we have a patent on mercury, SOx, and NOx, and they would not respond. Why not? We want to know. Okay, we contact the EPA, no response. I mean, if the EPA is clearly interested in reducing these harmful effects,
Okay.
if they're clearly interested, why don't they want to talk
1 minute
to
to
industry's
respond. Jim?
technology to do so?
I didn't get a minute on the other one. So
Okay.
I didn't get a minute.
1 minute if you can.
I totally agree. And the question is, how do we encourage that innovation? And that's a discussion that needs to be held. And it's hardly ever heard. I totally agree. Now, as a solution, a beginning solution, in our view, is to begin to, that's another reason why we think that overseeing the regulation at the state level makes a lot of sense, because Kentucky knows what's best for Kentucky, at least better than what Washington does. And by doing that, I think we would encourage, for example, if we said that the 25% of coal that's mined and never leaves here, if we made that, just that portion of our coal industry overseen at the state level, we think that would encourage more development of coal, more energy development, more innovation. But when you have heavy-handed regulations, as we feel that many of these are costly regulations, we feel like that discourages. So if you allow the marketplace to work, history shows that will improve innovation. It will create new technologies, just like you used about the fax machine. Although I know Mr. Gore said he invented the internet, but we don't think that happened that way. We think it was the result of the marketplace demands and being able to respond to that. But if you have an industry that isn't able to because of over-regulation from Washington, then we think that could be a real issue there.
Anything to comment on, Tom, or are you good?
Well, I think, internet was developed because of government investment in DARPA. Your point's well taken. A lot of what the driver has been in pollution control over the past 30 years and more has been government setting a target and allowing the technology to be developed to respond to it. And every time that has happened, we've not only met the target, but we've done it less expensively than we thought it was going to be. That's if you allow a sufficient amount of lead time. All right. My concern about dealing with CO2 is that the technology is not there right now to deal with sequestration and capture, even for new plants. You can capture it, but you can't sequester it. Setting a reasonable target within each industrial sector and allowing a lot of flexibility in how you meet it for example, the agricultural sector could be significant in helping us to meet national carbon targets by using innovations in the way that soil is managed and carbon is sequestered. You need to set the goal. We need to invest in research and development, and we need to get those technologies to the marketplace.
But I have to interrupt you.
Sure.
Because
Yeah.
there's no legislation on carbon. The legislation right now is on mercury, SOx,
No, I
and
understand.
NOx.
I understand.
And so that's why we believe this is a politically charged issue, because government officials are not limiting their conjecture towards the issues. They're talking about carbon, which has no legislation right now. We have the ability to meet SOx, NOx, and mercury right now. And so instantly when we bring that up, we believe that it's a politically charged issue because they instantly go to carbon.
One sentence. In the governor's energy plan that he developed back in 2012 when they were made Energy Star partners by the EPA, one of those points was to develop carbon capture sequestration technology. That should be done at the state level. That's the right way to do that, in our view.
Let's move on to the next question.
We have 4 minutes until closing.
Okay.
I'll be very, very quick. My question is, going back to the subject topic that was first laid out here, how is an entire industry affected when we're talking about a solution that would only cover 25% of the coal that is produced in this state? How is the other 75% of coal going to reconcile that conflict between potential state regulations and federal regulations when that's going across state lines and across the world?
What has happened historically is that it wasn't being reconciled. Okay? We understand that the environmental impacts of mining are unrelated to the marketplace in which the mined coal is sold. And so the question is, if the state does primarily regulate, the question is, should the federal government have backup authority when the state fails to do its job? And we may have a disagreement there, I don't know. But the jurisprudence that the courts have developed around the Commerce Clause recognize that sometimes a wholly intra-state activity can adversely affect commerce among the states. So if Kentucky or another state says, we have jurisdiction over the intra-state mining and use of coal, and we intend to set our standards differently, it adversely affects the marketplace and the congressional goal of assuring that the public is protected and that the environment is not damaged. So, you know, that is the relationship. It's the substantial effect test, that the substantial effect in the aggregate of exempting this or that.
Okay, the response to that, yeah, that's a great question. And the response is, if there is tension, what's the proper response to that? And it is, I believe, to allow the marketplace to work and determine, and so maybe coal that's mined and produced within the state, maybe it ends up costing less. And the 75% that's being, that's being interstate, being taken across state borders, maybe that ends up costing more. But it should not be up to the federal government, especially some agency in the federal government, unelected bureaucrats in the federal government, to determine what is going to happen if that happens. So, and then, why do we assume the state is going to fail if it has more oversight? Because wouldn't people living in Kentucky, care the most about the environment here?
That's really not what I was trying to address. I was trying to address the strife that is caused within a company to have to decide which master he is serving, a state regulator or a federal regulator.
Right. Well, that would just be a matter of with the actual coal, and there is a way. There is a way to take what I call, and I'll give the layman's term because it's meaningful and it helps me understand this, but it is to take a sample or a DNA sample, if you will, of coal mines. And that way it can be determined if that coal is being produced here and staying here. I mean, it can be determined if those standards and rules are being met. It can be done.
We have spent, in a state that doesn't have a whole lot of money to waste, we have spent hundreds of thousands of dollars paying attorneys for the privilege of having them take the Ten Commandment cases to the U.S. Supreme Court and having the states lose. we don't need to replicate that by creating an intrastate coal act that clearly is inconsistent with Commerce Clause principles that have been enunciated for 70 years or more since the 1942 case of Wickard versus Filburn. The issue of
Let's move on.
what the role is of the federal government vis-a-vis the state is they have backup authority. And the person who has a permit is primarily regulated by the state, but the federal government has a backup role.
If a private citizen,
Congress set that role.
yeah.
Let's let Jim go
if
now.
a private citizen wants to take a Ten Commandment case to all the way to the Supreme Court or to the World Court for that matter, I'm sorry, Tom, but I don't want you or anybody in Washington or anybody in Frankfurt or anybody else telling them they can't do that. And and we're talking, you're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars in litigation related to Ten Commandments cases, but what about the billions and billions of dollars required of coal companies to develop technology for mandates that are yet uncertain? You said that earlier yourself, and I appreciate that.
You don't develop the technology
they're
for
uncertain
mandates, Jim. You develop the technology in response to certain mandates. And my point was not that an individual shouldn't take whatever case they want to court. My point is you encourage states to enact a patently unconstitutional bill like the Intrastate Coal Act, which doesn't recognize that there are 3 bases for Commerce Clause jurisdiction and that the Supreme Court has already ruled that the Surface Mining Act doesn't violate either the 10th Amendment or the Commerce Clause. It's not solving the problem.
Yeah, well, we need to solve
And clarifying
that issue.
opinion from fact would, I think, would not be saying patently unconstitutional.
Yeah.
Okay,
Oh, no,
last question.
It's not, I'm sorry, it's not opinion. It is unbroken line of precedent since 19...
Well, it's our opinion that the Filburn decision was wrong. That's our opinion.
Okay, final question.
First of all, I just wanted to thank both the speakers for coming here tonight, and really I think there was a really good discussion, and I think I benefit and the rest of us do when we aren't yelling at each other and we try to get to some common agreement. So thank you very much for your time tonight, and we all appreciate that. The question I had was kind of directed more to Mr. Waters, and I know that you talked more about wanting Kentucky, the state, to have some more power in some of the enforcement of some of the rules and regulations. I know one of the solutions or one of the benefits of that you talked about was being able to respond to some of the permits in a more timely fashion. I want to know if you could elaborate or talk a little bit more about some of the other benefits that might be besides that. I know that was one concrete example. Do you have any others that you could share?
Well, we also mentioned economic development incentives that would be created. We also think there would be incentives for more technological development in the coal industry if this was regulated at the state level. So you know, the bottom line, I guess, and we're out of time, but that's a great question for a whole night. But I would say that I have faith in individual Kentuckians and individuals. I have more faith in our state environmental cabinet than I do in the regulatory cabinet in Washington. But more importantly than that, I think it's much easier for individual Kentuckians to hold accountable state level. It's much easier to hold people in Frankfurt or even at City Hall accountable than it is someone 500 miles away for their decisions. So I think it's addressing accountability. I think also it would improve accountability to the people most affected by pollution or who could be. So, yeah, thanks. Good question.
Good. Final comment?
I think that, the thousands of people whose lives, whose water supplies, whose homes were damaged, whose lives are ruined, whose family cemeteries were desecrated by mining companies in the 60s and all the way through the 70s might have a slightly different view on whether the state left to its own devices would effectively regulate the impacts of a very politically powerful industry, because history shows that they didn't. So I guess
we agree.
We agree. The perspective from the top of the hill is always different from the perspective at the bottom of the hill.
We agreed, though, that sometimes mistakes are made. But to penalize an entire industry to the tune of billions of dollars a year, 4,000 miners out of jobs, 12,000 more jobs indirectly affected by it, I just think it takes a little more than just, hey, we're here, we're the EPA, and we're going to regulate. We're going to do it whether you like it or not. I think that's a problem.
That's your mark.
Okay,
Thank you.
this took guts from the panelists. If you all could give them a final round of applause. Thank you so much. Very much appreciate it. Thank you, Tom. appreciate it very much. Thanks to the coaches, sponsors that we had. We also are very interested in future topics, future speakers, and I even heard comments that this could go again. If you all are interested, we're interested, certainly. Yeah, it might be exhausting for you, but we very much enjoy it. We have our next event on July 23rd. We don't know the topic yet, but we are narrowing in on one, so we'll keep you posted on that. Mostly, we want you to think about the ground rules as you are having your own personal conversations, both at the dinner table, on Facebook, wherever you are talking politics. Check your words. As Lynn said, check your language. Make sure that it is without blame, because if it is with blame, we are not going to get your point across, and we're therefore not going to get any new solutions. So check your language. Make sure that what you're saying is aligned with truth, the truth that the other side really does have positive intent, and that you don't have the full picture. So question your own virtue. Alexander Hamilton said that he wanted all of us to have a lesson in moderation in anything where we believe we are truly right. So question your own virtue. That's what we ask. All right. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.